So it's all yours, David.
Great. Thank you very much. Good morning. It's great to see everybody here today. I was delighted to be invited to talk this morning. I am an A&V volunteer. I moved to Arlington about, well, not quite 2 years ago and wanted to get to know the community and found A&V and have loved it ever since. I have really enjoyed the opportunity to meet people and get out in the community and get out of my house and do something positive. So I just can't say enough about the organization and all the great people I've met. The staff is wonderful. The volunteers are wonderful. I've just had so many great experiences and look forward to having many, many more. But unfortunately, we get to talk about something not nearly as fun and positive as volunteering today. And that would be artificial intelligence and some of the threats and risks that it's posing as people, particularly American voters, that's who I'm thinking of right now anyway, are trying to make a decision this fall, which creates a lot of opportunity for people to spread false and misleading claims and information, and it makes it very difficult, I think, for everybody to know what information they can trust. So I thought I would talk a little bit about what I do and how we cover misinformation and some of the tips I've learned from covering it for several years about how you can sort of make sure the information you're finding online is somewhat reliable. First of all, I have worked at the Associated Press for 13 years now. I'm originally from Illinois, from the Chicago suburbs. I worked in newspapers for several years all around the country before joining the AP. And I covered politics in New York and New England before taking on my current beat about 5-6 years ago, right before the pandemic anyway, which created a lot of false and misleading news, as you might imagine, that kept me busy for several years. And I'll tell you a little bit about the AP before we get started. And Gary, I'm sorry, I've changed my mind once again. I'm going to try and do my PowerPoint. We'll see. This will be a learning experience for me. I don't think I've ever tried to share a PowerPoint on Zoom. So if this doesn't work, you'll be back to my face in about 10 seconds. I'm going to share my screen and put on the presentation.
All right, we can see it.
Okay, that worked. Great. And hopefully you can still hear me as well.
Yep.
First of all, a lot of people I talk to have heard of the Associated Press. They've seen the little AP thing around a story, but they don't know what it means. And what we are is a nonprofit cooperative that was founded in 1846 by a bunch of newspapers that were looking for a way to basically share costs and share coverage of the Mexican-American War. It was several newspapers in New York that basically didn't want to pay to send 5 different reporters when they could share one reporter. So basically, it was a scheme invented to save money for newspapers, and it's turned into the largest news organization in the world. We have people in 250 bureaus in 100 different countries at last count. We put out about 2,000 stories a day. Our photos are probably the most seen thing that we put out. We have more than 1 million photos put out on the wire every year. We've won a bunch of Pulitzers. And the thing that always amazes me is more than half the world's population sees something from us every day. And that could be a sports photo, that could be a headline about a landslide or a flood or a city council vote, or it could be something from here in Washington, which is one of our largest offices in the world, as you might expect. I was the first reporter that the AP ever asked to cover quote unquote misinformation. And my first question is, what on earth does that even mean? And we come up with a definition. We define everything at the AP. We have a very thick book that basically talks about how you capitalize every single word in the English language. And we define misinformation as any false information that could be mistaken for truth. So that includes honest mistakes. You know, if you put on Facebook, I hear it's going to rain today, make sure to stay inside, and then it doesn't rain, you were wrong, and that's technically misinformation, even though you didn't mean to mislead anybody. You were just sharing something that wasn't accurate, and that happens, of course, all the time. It also includes exaggerations, misunderstandings, and intentional misinformation, which is what we call disinformation, which is when someone knows that their information is incorrect and they spread it anyway. We see this often from scam artists, from certain foreign nations, and from certain politicians. Importantly, misinformation can be transmitted in any medium. It can be spoken between people. It can be on social media. It can be on television. It can be in podcasts or the radio. Anything that includes information that is false could be called misinformation. And then it's, I think, helpful to break down misinformation into the sort of buckets that we see when we cover this. And you could probably imagine what these buckets are. Anything that people talk about, there can be false information about it, including the weather. But a lot of what we see today, particularly on the internet, can kind of be broken down into these categories. The one that I think we think about the most is political misinformation. And that can be misinformation about an issue, misinformation about a candidate or their stance on an issue, or also, and this can be particularly harmful, misinformation about voting itself, telling people, oh, go here to register to vote, or the registration deadline has already passed when it hasn't. Things like that that can keep people from participating in democracy. That can be misinformation too. And then COVID is a good reminder that we see a lot of health-related misinformation. This is probably the most common stuff that people encounter because it includes things like fad diets, supplements. I see these things all the time now on social media for something called chair yoga, which promises to make me as fit as a 20-year-old without having to actually sweat at all somehow. So claims about cures for disorders and diseases, they can be misinformation. False claims about 5G wireless towers causing cancer. That can be a type of misinformation that we've seen a lot of, actually. And that is in the next category as well, technology. Then there's some others. There's geopolitical misinformation. This is the stuff that we see some of our foreign adversaries like Russia and China and Iran try and spread. There could be historic misinformation. This is false claims about, say, the JFK assassination. I think it's important to remember, and I'll interrupt myself here to remember that just about everybody believes and spreads misinformation. It's a very human thing to do. I'm going to embarrass my mother by saying she's a big believer in a lot of JFK conspiracy theories, has for many years. And I'm certainly not going to weigh in on the JFK assassination this morning. But I think if you think about it, we all believe certain things that we may not have proof for. And they're generally things that speak to us on some level and contain some truth that we believe. I think in my mother's case, she didn't trust the government, and she believes that the government was lying, and she thought JFK was a young leader with great promise, and that evil people in our government had him killed. And I think to her that kind of has a story in it that makes sense to her and helps explain the world. And I think that's kind of how we all approach this stuff. We believe sort of what we choose to believe, and then we look for information that justifies that belief. And that's one of the reasons why misinformation can refer to anything that people are talking about, any important issue of the day, immigration, police conduct, climate change, inflation. As I put here, the more important the subject, the more likely it is that it'll be targeted by misinformation, whether intentionally or not. Why are we so vulnerable to this? I think it makes a lot of sense to look at people as a very social organism, and we share information. Information is how we amass power and make decisions for our own safety and the safety of our families. We're a species that communicates all the time. We're always looking to our environment for clues about what's going to happen next. And when we don't know something, I think our brain, and I've talked to a lot of neuroscientists who've studied this, our brain will instinctively try and fill in the gap. If there's an unknown surrounded by a bunch of knowns, our brain doesn't like that. And it'll try and fill it in with whatever it can, whether that's a guess, an assumption, or misinformation. And so that's why we're all thirsty for explanations that can help us make sense of the world. And this is my own personal opinion, but frankly, as the world gets more complicated and technology gets more complicated, I think we're getting more and more hungry for those explanations and those simple truths. To understand something that a lot of people don't understand can also give you a sense of power. It gives you a sense that you're special, that you know how the world operates and other people don't. And I think that's one reason why people are likely to spread and look for misinformation, because they want that power. Finally, you know, we're very emotional creatures, and we're always looking for signs of danger. Even in our civilized time, when most of us are pretty safe most of the time, we're looking for threats. And we respond pretty strongly to negative emotions like anger and fear. And so misinformation that's most successful will play on this stuff. False claims that suggest you are in danger, or your retirement savings are in danger, or your children are in danger, or their educational opportunities are in danger. Those will get your attention. And so false claims that resonate with those emotions will be more successful. The motives for spreading this stuff. This, I think, makes sense to a lot of people. People are trying to help. They spread information. Some of it's wrong. That happens all the time. Then there's, you know, greed, the oldest motive around. There are people that lie and use the internet to perpetrate scams, and con artists that are trying to defraud people with investment scams, health scams, you name it. You go on the internet, you can find it. Perhaps more troublingly, in recent years, we've noticed a real increase in extremist groups. These would be neo-Nazi groups, white supremacist groups, terrorist groups that have used online misinformation to try and recruit new followers. As we can talk about in a little bit, the internet creates these silos where, if you're not careful, you can find yourself only getting information from certain sources again and again and again. And it starts to color your perspective of the world. And extremist groups take advantage of this. And they find little corners of social media where they can find potential recruits. And by feeding them a steady diet of misinformation, they could potentially radicalize them. We've seen a number of mass shooters recently, unfortunately, that have been radicalized in this way. Lastly, there's power involved in misinformation, political power and geopolitical power. And so forces and candidates and groups that are looking to amass power have figured out that you can lie to people and mislead them, and for your own benefit. And so we see that happening more and more on the internet. You're probably all thinking, well, people have lied since there were people. How is this any different than what humans have always dealt with? And I would say in many ways it's not. If you're a student of history, you know that the printing press unleashed a wave of dramatic changes at the time that led to a lot of conflict and even war. And I think the internet is a similarly disruptive technology that gives us great power, great potential, and also can radically shift some of the ways that humans have operated for a long time. And that internet can make misinformation travel a lot faster and further than it ever could before. Decades ago, if you were interested in, say, joining a white supremacy group, you had to find that group, and it would be difficult. You'd have to find flyers, and you'd have to show up at meetings in basements and things like that. Now you can Google it, and it's easy for these people to come together. And that, of course, gives them a little bit more power. We talked about echo chambers and silos and how the internet can make it easier for people of all to really only read the information that they want to read. And you're not exposed to other sources of information. Used to, when we all read the same newspaper, that newspaper had a sports section, it had an arts section, it had a local section, and we all were sort of forced to read the same thing. That had good and bad aspects to it. One good aspect, though, is that we all got information we didn't necessarily know we were going to get. When you open up the paper, you read all kinds of things, and you didn't seek out, oh, I'm only going to read the articles about, this topic. You read it all. And as a result, you got a pretty broad view of your community. And it certainly had its flaws, but you got the whole waterfront. And now with the internet, you have the ability to only pick and choose what you want to read, what information you want to have access to. And that can create some tunnel vision. That is tied to the fracturing of the media ecosystem, which is a big driver in misinformation. People aren't as trusting in traditional news outlets, often for good reason, as they used to be. There are a lot more sources of information that people can consult, and many of those sources don't really have the institutional rules that American journalism has built over the last 200 years. Many of them don't have the code of ethics, say, that the AP has or that many leading newspapers have. Finally, some other differences now is we have politicians who are really willing to engage in spreading and harnessing this stuff for their own power. Before, I think there was a general attitude of there are certain things that politicians and political parties in this country won't lie about, or if they do, they'll be held accountable. And it seems that some of those guardrails have diminished over the years. And then finally, this is a huge election year, so that creates opportunities for all of the people we've talked about. People spreading misinformation unintentionally just because they want to be helpful, and people looking to spread it for their own reasons. And then we've talked a little bit about artificial intelligence, which is sort of the real game changer this year. A lot of people are very concerned that some of these new programs will be used to create what are called deep fakes, which are very lifelike audio and video and photographs of a person doing something that they didn't really do. There have been a number of these already that have popped up online. There was one in New Hampshire, a robocall, an automated phone call that went out to registered Democrats, and it had a voice that was posing as Joe Biden, telling them not to bother voting. And it was actually a fake audio doctored version of Biden's voice. It was a computerized voice. It wasn't true. But that's the kind of thing that people are concerned we'll see more of as we get closer to the election. Say a video of former President Trump engaging in some sort of activity that would make him look bad, or a video of Joe Biden doing the same thing, or a video that makes Joe Biden look older and weaker than he is, something like that you could imagine would greatly mislead voters. So there's a lot of concern about that, and we can talk more about AI in just a bit. Why is this a problem? Well, it causes people not to trust their own government and their own institutions. It causes people to feel like they can't trust the information they find online. It stresses people out. I hear from people all the time who say they don't know who to trust, what to believe, and that erosion of confidence and trust has a significant impact on our democracy and our community. Studies show it leads to greater polarization, more division, and it also can have an economic and political impact. We saw that our response to the pandemic was greatly affected by some of the debates about claims that weren't necessarily accurate. Certainly false claims about the war in Ukraine right now could undermine support for that country. That's a key objective of Russian disinformation right now, is to tear down support for Ukraine and the US. So those are some of the real world impacts that we see. Then this is my last slide, and I'll get back to, we can talk a little bit more about fun stuff. This is my little cheat sheet for how to guard against misinformation online. We all go online for information. We're online right now, communicating with each other. It's impossible not to go on the internet to find information, but you can do it in a way that reduces the chances you're going to find something harmful or inaccurate. The best advice is have a well-rounded media diet. Don't just rely on one website, one news source. Also, don't rely on social media for your news. It's a great place to see headlines or see stories, but then leave social media to find the actual story and get the facts. Try and have a healthy range of sources, you know, a local news source, a local newspaper or TV station or radio station, a couple national ones. And the more well-rounded your media diet is, the more likely you're going to have a comprehensive view of what's going on, and the less likely you're going to get sucked down a rabbit hole of misinformation. We talked earlier about how a lot of this stuff exploits strong emotions. It makes you mad, it makes you angry, it makes you afraid. So be wary of stories that seem designed to trigger your emotions. The AP, of course, we're pretty clinical in the way we write our stories. We're pretty just the facts. And that has helped us, I think, quite a bit in recent years, because we're generally considered to be pretty right in the middle. And I think our attempt to be really rational and unemotional helps that. So if you see a story that seems really designed to make you mad, maybe check it out. Google it. See if there are other publications with the same story. Any big story is going to be covered by multiple publications. So if you see something that's a huge story that really upsets you, and it's only in one publication, one website, you might want to reconsider whether you should repost it or pass it along, because it might not be accurate. That's my third tip. Think before reposting. A lot of people will automatically, I know I've done this, you'll see something that really gets your goat or makes you happy, and you'll automatically try and repost it as quickly as you can to your friends so they see it. But often that's exactly what these people want you to do. If there's something that really makes you mad about one of the candidates, and you just, oh, by golly, we got to get this out there, everybody's going to be as steamed as I am. Take a minute, calm down, relax, let your emotions pass over you, maybe double check some of these things. Make sure they check out before you pass it along. That's a great way to avoid accidentally spreading misinformation yourself. And then finally, you know, bring your critical thinking skills to bear on this. Ask yourself follow-up questions. You know, if this had really happened, then wouldn't somebody over here be asking about it? Or if this really happened, wouldn't this agency or this governmental institution have taken action or something like that? Check it out. Ask questions. You know, be skeptical. I talked to a psychiatrist or a psychologist one time who studied how humans take in information. And she said distrust can make you, it can make you shut down and turn inward and stop trusting other people. And of course, as humans, we have to trust other people to some degree. And so she said, be cheerfully skeptical. Be skeptical of things you see online. Ask questions. Don't necessarily believe everything you read, but also don't let it get you down. I feel like things can be so negative right now that it's easy to get frustrated and overwhelmed. And I always think the best thing to do if you find yourself doing that is turn off the computer and go take a walk. But anyway, I will stop sharing my screen and we can talk a little bit more about artificial intelligence, because I know that's one of the things that people are most interested in. First of all, I think a lot of people don't even understand what the term means. We've had artificial intelligence programs for many, many years. The work on these programs has been going on for decades. Many of the earliest innovations were many decades ago. It's only really coming into the public consciousness now on the level that it is because there's suddenly a bunch of these programs that are commercially available that anybody can use, that are cheap and highly powerful. I don't know if you guys have played around with some of these programs, like ChatGPT is a popular one. They are a lot of fun and they're pretty remarkable. I haven't done this in a while, but when ChatGPT was new and I was still somewhat new to Arlington, I would use it for restaurant recommendations. I would say, you know, we liked this restaurant. What other restaurants in Arlington might we like? And it would give me suggestions. I will say, however, the suggestions were pretty bad. And they make a lot of mistakes. I asked it who I was one time. I said, do you know a person named David Klepper? And what can you tell me about it? And he said, yes, he is a Pulitzer-winning journalist at the New York Times. And I said, thank you, ChatGPT. That's quite a promotion. I've never won a Pulitzer and I don't work at the New York Times. And I have no idea why it thought that. These things work by guessing what the best answer is based on all of the information that these programs have accessed. So it's making a prediction. Those predictions can be false or can be wrong. So there's a lot of concern about the reliability of some of these programs. But in terms of their ability to create photos, content rapidly in a variety of languages, they're really unprecedented. You can quickly, if you're a campaign and you want to put out a statement to voters, you can use these programs to quickly translate that statement into Spanish or any number of other languages. And that's a huge tool, obviously, for campaigns. You can automate a lot of the things that it took staffers hours and weeks to do. That's quite a tool. However, it can also be misused. So far, we haven't seen the sort of giant AI apocalyptic disinformation attack that a lot of people have been worried about. And what that would look like probably would be a foreign nation creating a deep fake, maybe of Biden saying something he didn't say, doing something he didn't do, or of Trump, and putting that on social media, and the world believes it before it can be debunked. That's sort of the big concern. That hasn't happened yet. Instead, what we've seen is a lot of more limited uses by con artists. I have a story out today, in fact, about how some con artists created political ads on Facebook that said, if you're a Donald Trump supporter, take our survey and we'll send you a free Trump 2024 flag. And a lot of Trump supporters did that. And then it said, well, we need your credit card information so we can send you the flag and you can pay the $3 in shipping and handling. And people said, sure, this is the Trump campaign. I can trust them. Well, it wasn't the Trump campaign. And those people were later charged $80, on their credit card statement that they didn't know about. That one used deep fake videos of celebrities, including like Clint Eastwood, endorsing Donald Trump. So that's kind of how we're seeing it so far, is a lot of con artists are using this kind of stuff to fool people. That may not be quite as destructive on a grand scale as if someone like Russia were to create something like this, but it's not helpful to normal voters who are trying to go online to find information or maybe support their candidate. So my advice for AI and deepfakes is the same as all things online. Be a little skeptical. If you see something that seems too crazy to be believable, that makes you mad, that makes you sad, think about it. Take a step back, do a little research, and know that just because you see it online, just because a friend of yours put it on Facebook, doesn't necessarily mean it's accurate. So I think I said I would maintain half of my time for questions, and I love talking about my job, as you can probably tell. I'd be happy to talk about anything having to do with what I've talked about, or the AP, or journalism in general. Or we can talk about how great A&V is. I'll leave it all up to you all. But thank you again very much for having me chat with you today.
Okay, well, we've got a number of questions that have come in.
Great.
First one was, what Chicago suburb did you grow up in?
Naperville, Illinois, if
Okay.
anybody knows that one.
Did you have to sign any kind of a non-disclosure agreement when you joined the AP?
No. No, we have a code of conduct, of course, and a code of ethics and things like that. But no, we don't have any non-disclosure agreements or anything like that, thankfully.
And do you have any comment on the recent White House press briefing where the New York Times reporter kept pressing questions about doctor visits to the White House?
No, I read about that with great interest. I think it's been very interesting watching the coverage of the questions surrounding the president's age and vitality. No, I don't have any questions about them. I know that this has really thrown a lot of the assumptions about the race into the air and really undermined a lot of the ways that people expected this race to go. I've helped cover many presidential races. I thought last time would be the most dramatic and unpredictable, and this one looks like it may be even stranger, which I find hard to believe, but there we are.
We've got a comment here that they've read that people often seek out misinformation as a way to validate beliefs that they hold,
Hmm.
like what you said about your mother,
Hmm.
rather than researching unbiased data that might force them to change their views.
You do have definitely true. And I, having covered this, I've been forced to sort of look inward and notice these things in myself too. And I think we all do this. We all go out every day in our environment looking for information that helps us make better decisions. And so if we sort of see the world one way, and that's what we've invested our time and mental energy on, we're going to look for things that validate that. We're going to try and defeat any challenges to that worldview so that we can keep it, coherent to ourselves. And I guess that just shows that we need to be flexible in our worldviews, and we need to make sure that they're grounded on facts and shared, understood things, and not biases or falsehoods. Easier said than done, I know.
Comment here about a recent episode of the Hidden Brain podcast. Talked about research into the minds of people drawn to radical or fringe ideas. He said it was very interesting to understand the cognitive science behind extreme beliefs.
Yes, it is. That one of the things that has impressed me the most about this beat, as since I got it several years ago, is the science. And there's really interesting science being done on why people believe what they believe, how they spread those beliefs, what makes them more enticing to someone or less, and perhaps most importantly, how we can address that. Uh, the tech companies have been criticized, probably for good reason, for not doing a lot on this problem or for failing to follow through with some of their promises. Uh, Companies like Meta, which owns Facebook and Instagram, and Twitter, which is now called X, once had like pretty robust rules that came into place during the pandemic that would try and police this stuff. And they've really rolled back, and it wasn't perfect. Certainly, it wasn't perfect, and there were a lot of concerns that they went overboard in some cases, not too far in others. But they've really rolled back a lot of that. Twitter was sold to Elon Musk, the owner of Tesla, and he basically eliminated all of their content moderation. Twitter had sort of been the most in the forefront about keeping people off, like neo-Nazis, and they're all back. But anyway, to get back to my point, the tech companies have invested a lot of money in research into ways to address this because they have some liability here. And Google has invested a lot of money in something called pre-bunking, which involves trying to inoculate people against misinformation before they encounter it, sort of like a vaccine inoculates you against a virus. And I'll give you an example. After the war in Ukraine, there were a lot of Ukrainian refugees spreading into Eastern Europe. And as often happens whenever war refugees enter a new country, there were quickly rumors popping up in places like Poland or the Czech Republic that refugees were committing crimes, um, um, stealing from people, taking jobs, committing welfare fraud, things like that. And so Google created a series of 30-second ads on YouTube that would play like a commercial. When you go to YouTube and you watch a video, they'll play a commercial first. And these little ads said basically what I just said, that ever since there's been war, there have been refugees. Refugees are often stigmatized in their new homes, and they're accused of taking jobs and committing crimes. But here are the facts. In fact, that's not true. In fact, refugees commit fewer crimes than residents. In fact, crime has not gone up in Poland. And so they played these little ads on YouTube in Poland, the Czech Republic, and another country, and then tested people to see how vulnerable they were to misinformation about refugees. And they found that if you give people a little bit of critical thinking help on the front end, they're much more likely to notice something that is misinformation and to reject it. So really, by kind of triggering our own innate critical thinking skills that we all have to a greater or lesser degree, you can really help people kind of think for themselves. And the idea is that we can probably make this a part of education. and really bone up on our sort of media literacy skills in elementary school all the way through college, and that will hopefully equip people in the future to be a little bit more critical thinking when they go online. Last thing I'll add to this very long response is Finland. I wrote a piece about Finland last year. Somebody surveyed all the countries in the world and found that the Finns were the least vulnerable to misinformation, that they were the best critical thinkers when it came to the internet and could spot things and be like, no, that doesn't look quite right. This doesn't look quite right. And so I tried to figure out, well, why is that? What is it about the Finns that make them so good at fighting misinformation? And the answer is they have these media literacy classes from preschool all the way on up. And it really helps equip their residents with better skills at navigating the information they find. Of course, the reason they've done this, which was interesting to me, is think about their neighbor immediately to the east. They've been dealing with Russian propaganda and disinformation for 100 years. So they have learned that they have to do this in order to equip their citizens to defend against it, which I thought was very interesting. Walter Cronkite. Yeah, we all did believe Walter Cronkite. And of course, I don't remember Walter Cronkite, I hate to tell you, but that was the climate that made me want to be a journalist, was that kind of institution, that people trusted, that people sought out, that stood for something very American. And it is sad to me the things that have changed. But there's still a lot of really good journalism out there, and the internet has, in fact, made it easier to do good journalism, maybe harder to find it. That would be the problem. I see. Yes, we all used to share the same reality. That's a basic truth, I think, that underlies a lot of this, that on the internet, you can live your entire life in a different reality to your neighbor. I don't know how many of you are on Reddit, which is a social media bulletin board messaging app kind of thing. And I'm embarrassed to admit it, but I'm a big Star Trek fan, and I have 2 cats. And so my Reddit feed is a lot of cat photos, a lot of Star Trek discussion, and because of my professional interests, white supremacy, Russian propaganda, and COVID misinformation. So if you looked at my Reddit feed, you would think I'm a very strange individual. And it's totally different than the Reddit feed for my next door neighbor. And we can live our lives in these little silos and not really know about the needs and desires and thoughts of our next door neighbor. And when we all lived in the same world and had the shared reality, that was a lot harder. We watch PBS NewsHour over here every night. I agree. I think it's a very good source. NPR, I've appreciated NPR for years too. Periodically, some group or another will try and publish a study saying who are the most trusted news organizations in the US. And the 2 you just mentioned and the AP are generally up there, and I'm very happy to see that. And I think it's because all 3 of those take the time to go a little bit deeper and don't go for the sort of emotional coverage, that the tabloidy type coverage that a lot of other outlets seem to be drawn to. That is true, international news, and we've seen such a reduction in international news in the Americans' news diet in the last several decades. There used to be a lot of stories in the newspaper every day about goings-on overseas, and anybody that's traveled overseas and watched the television news in the hotel room knows that that's still the case over there, that a lot of countries are much more focused on the rest of the globe than we are. I just don't repost any political assertions. Steve, bless you. As someone who covers political assertions online, I think it'd be my personal opinion is that the world would be better if we talk to our neighbor about politics and talk to people online about cats or Star Trek, depending on your interests. The Drudge Report. The Drudge Report, I think, was kind of a pioneer in, and for those of you who don't know, the Drudge Report is a website that does have a bit of a conservative bent. They're very aggressive And they had a lot of big scoops early on in their tenure, maybe 10, 15 years ago, that really put them on the map as an early pioneer of online journalism. I mean, I won't comment about my personal opinions on a publication, but I will say that they're very aggressive. They've had some issues, as any outlet would over the years, with trying to maintain that conservative bent. It can be a little tricky, I think, for outlets that have more of a partisan approach to news, because they can easily fall into a trap of, false or misleading information. And that's true on both sides, which is one of the reasons the AP tries to stay right in the middle, and stay as independent as we can, because it can be fraught. Interesting comment from Nancy about AI, that her concern is that AI could take over people's sort of decision making. And I see that concern for the internet. Once we would sort of have a conversation about something, and now the inclination is to grab your phone and look it up. That's saved me a lot of headaches when I'm trying to remember who that actor is in that movie and why I feel like I recognize him. But I don't know if it's good for our conversation with each other and our fellow humans. And I do worry about that AI could, take away some people's jobs, change the economy in ways that would be very disruptive. The hope, of course, is that it will benefit the economy and create new industries, and benefit existing ones more than it will disrupt old ones. But being in the journalism industry, I'm sensitive to the idea that these technological changes can have rapid changes for our economy and our society. Here's a fascinating question. When newspapers receive advice from readers, like Free for All at the Washington Post, does the newspaper take it seriously and adopt their suggestions? I have many friends at the Washington Post. I read the Washington Post every day. I think they're an excellent newspaper. I can't speak to them specifically. However, I can share that when I was at newspapers, we took that stuff extremely seriously. I take it extremely seriously at the AP. I read every email I get from a reader, and many of them are very nasty. And I take that very personally. I've had to figure out ways to take it less personally, frankly. So I can guarantee you, they're like any other business, and they're like a business that really serves, that has a community service aspect. So I can guarantee you they may not act on it, but they'll listen. I worked at the newspaper in Kansas City, the Kansas City Star, for many years. And when we would do that kind of stuff, we would always consider whatever we heard. I mean, some of it might not make any sense. Some of it might be impossible. There might be a good reason why a paper can't do something a certain way, but we would always think about it. I think everybody who goes into journalism is keenly interested in what the public thinks, and anybody that broadcasts their content out into the world is going to be very interested in how it's received and what the public thinks. The rise of anti-Semitism, which is something I never expected that I would necessarily have to write about. We've seen, I think the internet makes it very easy to spread hateful messages without accountability. Like I was saying, once upon a time, if you wanted to be a part of a white supremacist group, you had to find them, and that was difficult. They would have little hand-printed flyers, in the basement that they would pass out, little handbills. And now, if you're just sort of curious about it, you can go online and find one of these groups within minutes. And I think that has a lot of. I'm not a parent, but I would be very concerned if I had children who are vulnerable to this kind of stuff, because a lot of these people are very sharp and very smart, and they can radicalize people without mentioning the words anti-Semitism. They dress it up in very appealing clothing sometimes. I think is greatly concerning, the rise in anti-Semitism and the rise in all kinds of hate. And I definitely think it's directly related to misinformation and the way we use the internet now, because I think it has taken away some of the accountability. Okay. Recommendations for best places to read or watch about presidential elections. Well, of course, I would say ap.org. This goes back, I think, to one of my first points, which is read a lot. Check out a few things, not just your Facebook feed, but check out a TV station's coverage and a newspaper's coverage and an online news publication's coverage. A lot of groups now for debates are running like live blogs where they're doing quick updates and fact checks. So if you're interested in following along in the debate, I know we're going to have only one more of those at this point. That's an option. But I think the more the better, and I fall into this trap too. I read the Washington Post, I read the Chicago Tribune, and the New York Times every morning. And that's, pretty much it. And so I have to force myself, let's read the Tulsa paper one day. Check out something new, see what people are saying in a part of the country that has nothing to do with you, or check out different perspectives. I think that's always a great way of not only understanding more about the race, but also the perspectives of other voters. We've all heard people who are like, I can't believe that guy won. Nobody I knew voted for him. Well, that's because you don't know the people who voted for him. So I always encourage people, check out, if you don't like Fox News, read Fox News every once in a while. See what they're saying. You don't have to like it. You don't have to believe it, but check it out. That's what I try and do. Interesting. This is a very interesting point from Liz about how people can use different information, different types of information, different ways of arguing to make their point. And we see that a lot. I forget the term, but instead of facts, people use emotions or oratory to make their point. And being human, we can fall for that. Somebody that delivers their point very well can maybe skate over the facts and not need them. Which is, I think, why, again, if something triggers your emotions, if you hear a soaring speech filled with great rhetoric and oratory, maybe check out the facts too. Don't just be suckered in by the Shakespearean quotes. Government data being highly inflated and politicized. I used to cover New York politics, and I will say that like the monthly unemployment numbers and like the state budget numbers, tax receipts, and things like that. This was why when Andrew Cuomo was the governor, we're always highly politicized. And half the job was just trying to unpack the numbers and figure out what the truth was. So stats alone are not, the savior here. If you just see a statistic, don't necessarily think must be true because it's a statistic. What do they say? Statistics lie.
Lies, damn lies and statistics.
Thank you. Yes, exactly. And that's very true. And, I'll see stories too that are like, the murder rate in Detroit is up 18,000%. And it's like, well, geez, that's a very specific number. It must be true. And so some people will use statistics to try and steal an air of authenticity. And often it's good to check those. I find the most nefarious ones, though, use like weaselly words to get away from an actual statistic you could fact check. And that's often the trickiest ones. Barbara makes a great point about bias being a little different from misinformation and disinformation. It totally is. But I think bias can make you vulnerable to those things because you have a tendency to want to see the world through a certain lens. And if you see information that validates that, you're more likely to believe it. This is why I think the Cubs are the greatest baseball team in the world, despite all the evidence. If you really want to believe something, you can often find a way to make it work. Media literacy classes in Arlington County. I bet there are. There's got to be something good at one of the rec centers or the community centers. I'm always amazed at the programming we have here in Arlington. And you know what, Tammy, if you would like, I can try and find that out, and I'll give everybody my email too if anybody wants to follow up. And Tammy, why don't you follow up with me, and I'll try and figure out what options there might be, because I bet there are some good ones. The AP logo. Oh man. We did change the logo a couple years ago. I have no idea why. They do this periodically. I think the one on my PowerPoint has like a slash through it, which I think is just a watermark from the PowerPoint. But that would be something for our brand experts. I was in a briefing yesterday on foreign threats to the election that the FBI was hosting, and they did questions by alphabetical order. And I thought, great, we're first. Nobody comes before AP. But I was last because they put the in front. So
The reason
anyway,
that I asked is because there were in your PowerPoint presentation, there were cutouts in the A, and there was a cutout in the red bar in the bottom. And I would like you to explain those, please.
I don't know. I think it might just be a redo of our brand.
Well, no, I can explain it.
Oh,
If
okay.
you
Good.
if you put up the slides, there's a transition between the text on the left and the picture on the right, and it's an irregular border. And what we're seeing in the thing Steve's talking about is
Oh,
that's where it's impinging on the A and impinging
this.
on the little.
I see what you're talking about. And in fact, if nobody minds, I'll share our screen so we can all see this. I believe this is what you're talking about right here, these little.
Yeah. And if
Yeah.
you go forward a little bit,
It's a conspiracy, obviously.
It must
Go
be. And, you know, I'm guessing here because this to me, this like these marks on the A, they look like I might have done them accidentally when
no,
building the
go to slide number 5. See that border between the picture and the text?
Yes, it's the same way.
Yeah.
So this is me trying to look cool in my PowerPoint is what this is.
Well,
And nothing else, just me and my bad PowerPoint skills.
and if you looked at the thumbnail on the left for slide number 2, those cutouts were missing.
Well, I think they were just my mistake when I was putting it together. I think I picked a cool border to make it look fancy, and that's what you get when you trust a reporter with technology. How many of you have heard of the AP? I'm curious.
Oh,
That's good. I often find people sort of have heard of us, but they don't really know what we are. And I tell them, you know, the flag raising photo at Iwo Jima, that was us. And they, oh, okay. And that immediately gets my foot in the door. But we've been around a long time and we hope to be around a lot longer. Very good. I think, is that all the questions?
well, the question's been asked a couple times about the future of newspapers.
Yeah.
Do you think they're going to fade away, or what do you see?
My first newspaper, which was in Myrtle Beach, the newsroom, Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, the newsroom is now a gun range, a firing range. My second newspaper, the Kansas City Star, where I spent like a decade, that newsroom where Ernest Hemingway worked, which was like the coolest old building, is now millennial housing with sand volleyball courts. And the beautiful printing press that they built in Kansas City to be the future of the newspaper when I was there is going to be torn down, and they're going to build a new baseball stadium probably there. So, you know, I don't know that anyone will actually have a printed newspaper at a certain point. And as someone who grew up reading printed newspapers, that breaks my heart because I think they're wonderful. The good ones will survive online and on social media by being smart. And the AP is trying to do this. The New York Times, the Washington Post, the LA Times, you know, they're all doing it to greater or lesser degrees. There will be news organizations. I don't know if they'll be called newspapers. When I started journalism school a long time ago, there was some professor who said, you know, in the future, reporters will have like a little camera on their glasses, and a microphone attached to their other side of their face, and they'll be able to take photos. And I thought, this sounds horrible. Like, I don't want to do this. And that's kind of where we're at, almost. Like the frog in the boiling water, I've kind of gotten used to it. But I mean, this is a change unlike any other in American journalism history, and it will continue to have big impacts, both on the industry and I think on our democracy. Another person I remember years ago told me that we're not going into a dark age, we're going into a gray age. There will still be really good sources of information out there. It'll be harder to find them. And there'll be a lot of bad sources of information that are misleading a lot of people. And I think that kind of sounds like where we're at. But I hope, I am always amazed when I meet young journalists who have the same passion I had 30 years ago, and who really want to get into the business, and who also understand TikTok and the internet and understand what readers want today. So, I'm optimistic that the medium may change. It may not be a physical paper anymore, but the need for smart information about the world we live in, the need to hold people accountable in power, those things will continue and hopefully continue to flourish.
David, I would just add a kind of a follow-up question to, because I had put that in, and thank you, Susan, for doing that. Do you think that those newspapers who are still trying to survive are now sort of dumbing down the information that is there? Are the reporters, if they're younger, appealing to a younger audience, so that maybe people like who are on this particular program today or activity today are sometimes frustrated because they don't see very many articles that are relevant to their lives in that?
Yes.
What do you think about that?
That's absolutely true. I don't know if you saw, there was a really good article yesterday in the Washington Post, I believe, about USA Today turning 50, I think, 45, 50, and how disruptive USA Today was when it arrived on the scene. And I can remember my parents talking about how there's nothing in here. It's written for kindergartners. It's all crayons. And now, like, it's almost encyclopedic compared to what you find. So I definitely think that is an option that some publications are taking, dumbing things down, writing about topics that they might not have once written about, pop culture and things like that.
Right.
We saw Gannett hire a Taylor Swift reporter last year, and that made a lot of news because people were outraged that they would hire someone to cover Taylor Swift while they're also firing someone that covers, Medicare. So I think that is a danger that a lot of publications are risking. And the trend certainly is shorter, faster, punchier. A lot of the most interacted with news right now on the internet is on TikTok. And it's like these quick 30-second stories, I guess you would call them. And for somebody who grew up reading the Chicago Tribune front to back, there's not enough. It's not nearly enough. It's not enough context. It just leaves me with more questions. However, the internet also makes room for much more thorough publications and more insidery stuff that people who are really interested in a topic can get into. So I think, if you're really interested in foreign policy, there's Foreign Policy Magazine. There are things out there for those people, but it's not as easy for people to find them. And going back to my newspaper analogy, back in the old days, you got your spinach with your dessert. You got to read about the Cubs game, and you heard about what was going on at the UN too, and you heard about how tax collections are down, whether you wanted to or not. And now people don't have that. People can live their whole lives without knowing about a state budget, and maybe that's an improvement. I don't know, but to me, I don't think so. So I share your concern, and I find that I'm often frustrated. And I have to do more digging to find out more information about the topic that I'm interested in.
Yeah, I understand. Any other questions from anybody here? It's after 11 o'clock, and wow.
Yeah, I had one.
Okay.
You talked about, checking other sources to see if something is misinformation. Are there debunking sites like Snopes.com and others that you would recommend people take a look at?
Snopes is good. You know, they've been around for a long time. PolitiFact is another organization that does this kind of work. And they will rapidly assess claims, you know, like they'll do these fact checks where Biden will say, well, inflation's gone down 3% this week or whatever. And they'll say, no, it's actually 4% or whatever. Those are both really good ones. Most of the major news outlets, CNN, the New York Times, ABC, us, will have fact checking groups as well. Like we've got people that just do fact checks, and we have a whole AP fact check website where people can go and search for things and look to see if their claim has been fact checked or not. Yeah, this Tammy makes a good point that, you know, a lot of experts, this is one of the positives, I think, of the disruption in the media ecosystem is once we were sort of the gatekeepers and expert analysis and facts and perspective was sort of filtered through us. And now, you know, thanks to the internet, experts can have their own site, their own channel, and can disseminate that information directly. So, you know, I often find I'm reading, like I'm interested in history, and instead of reading history magazines, I now watch history podcasts by actual history professors. You know, so I think that's one way where, yes, a lot of the information we're seeing is being dumbed down, but there's also an ability to go far deeper than we ever could, if you can find it. That's the tricky part.
Okay.
This was great. Thank you all very much. Let me put my email in the chat before I forget. It is my first initial, then last name, dklepper@ap.org. You can always just Google me too. But I hope to see you all very soon at an ANV event. And I thank you all for being members and being part of the community. Like I said, I just love the organization and I've loved getting to know everybody.
Well, and we'll look forward to seeing you at some future events, David. So thank you so much. And thanks to all of you who just hung in there and asked lots of questions and lots of good information here. It's very timely. So, and it's 11:07. So just remind you that next week on Coffee and Conversation, Helen King, who is the director of Arlington Agency on Aging, will be here to talk about the programs that the agency offers and tell what's coming up. So be sure and tune in next week. Helen King has been around a long time and has lots of good information about that. So please, please, please stay cool, stay hydrated, and we'll see you next week at 10 o'clock.